Review with me, Camelia Shambayati. In this episode, we'll be reviewing awards-winning film Terror, directed by David Felix Sutcliffe and Lyric Cabral. Joining me in the studio today, we have Tim Roby, a film critic for the Daily Telegraph, who is also a regular guest on BBC Film 2017 and the UK's Radio 4 film programme, and Raza Nadim, who is head of Muslim Public Affairs Committee UK and who has been involved in anti-Islamophobia campaigning for over 10 years. Now, Terror is the first documentary to place filmmakers on the ground during an active FBI counter-terrorism sting operation. The film delves into the dark world of FBI informants, government surveillance, and the US's so-called war on terror. Let's have a look at the trailer.
First saved message. Received March 9th at 4:50 p.m.
Once you send that last text, and let it go like this. I don't know who you've been talking to, but people came to my work today. Don't say feds, don't say police, don't say authority. Just say the people came to my work today and talked to me. And something like, inshallah, I'll see you around.
I don't like the word informant. They want to make a big bus. Just gave me his picture and told me, look, this is the POI, person of interest.
The FBI routinely uses informants to criminalize First Amendment protected activity, and this is the same pattern that emerges case after case after case.
If something happens to me, where does that leave my family?
I'm not in control of this. They are in control of it.
Thank you both for joining the show. So this film won an award at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival. Tim, if I could start with you, what was your general take on the film?
Well, it held quite a lot of value for me as an expose. Certainly it kind of opened a window on the world of counter-terrorism sting operations, which I have not really witnessed before. It does claim to be the first example of this kind of filmmaking. And I was troubled by it in various ways, but quite productively, I think, on the whole. And it led me in a direction which resolved some of my issues with the initial approach. I thought as it went along, I found that the characters came into closer focus, and I began to understand the issues involved, and it began to really convince me and win me over with its argument, essentially, which is that the FBI have crossed a line since 9/11 and are beginning to criminalise in kind of quite an sort of outlandishly unfair way behaviour which really shouldn't be criminalised.
Mm. And you, Raza, how did you find the film?
I mean, it's the talk of counter-terrorism and informants and, within the Muslim communities, especially within Britain and America, lots had been written in the past about it. So this really was quite interesting to see it happening in front of you. Really felt like you were on the journey with them as they were following, the protagonists and on the sting operation. So, I mean, in that sense, it was good because it no longer was an academic study or someone just, an article where someone is posing questions saying, have things gone too far? What happens to our liberties, etc.? You were watching it in action. I think from that perspective it was great. I think also because it showed for people like myself and other Muslim campaigners that this isn't just based on hearsay, this isn't just based on people kind of on conspiracy theories, this is actually happening, and that actually in many cases is being done by people who aren't that good. And you're right, a line has been crossed in many ways. So I think for me this was good because it arms us with the argument about how surveillance has gone too far.
I want to talk a little bit about the beginning of the film. I think it's quite a symbolic scene where we see a little girl singing the national anthem, the US national anthem, and specifically the filmmakers include the lyrics, land of the free, land of the brave. Tim, why do you think that was such a significant scene to include in the film?
I think you've sort of answered the question. It very much is a film about freedom and a film about the freedom of expression. And essentially what happens over the course of the film is that some beliefs held by the targets of these sting operations on social media and elsewhere become a basis on which to prosecute them. And I really don't think we should be prosecuting people for beliefs. It actually amounts to thought crime. By the end of the film, I really thought it had made that case very convincingly with especially two of the examples that it chooses in terms of the victims. But then there's also the if you like, the perpetrator of the sting, the main figure in the film, who is a very interesting and troubled figure in his own right, and clearly has a lot of issues. And really, a lot of the film is asking whether this kind of case should be entrusted over to a personality like that. Very early on, we hear the point made that informants for the FBI can be really quite bad people, because you're having to break faith with a lot of relationships that you build up. And the kind of person who would be willing to do that and willing to essentially betray confidences and friendships in this way, you wonder if they're verging on sociopathy, and I think that is an issue.
That was the actual phrase they used, wasn't it? In the radio thing, you hear them in the discussion. Actually, it is quite sociopathic to be able to build such a close relationship with someone and then kind of stab them in the back almost, take something out of context or whatever. But also, that the land of the free bit. For me, one thing that really stood out was because it showed that Saeed, Sharif, whatever you want to call him, that I think he believed in the American dream, and he talks about having a bakery, etc. and whatnot, providing for his child, and how this was an avenue to make some money. I think that line also stood out that way because, the American anthem is used in everything in America, right? From sports events to classrooms to whatever, you name it.
That's very true. And I want to pick apart Saeed's character a bit later on. But for now, let's take a brief break from the discussion and watch a clip from Terror, which gives us a glimpse into the workings of FBI informant Saeed Torres.
What is the map on the wall?
Why is the what?
Why is the map on the wall?
Find my locations around here.
Is there significance to the red lines?
Yes. It's regarding the work I do. No, I'm gonna give you the picture. I'm gonna put them up on here. It'll be better for you because I don't want to explain nothing to you. You got it, that's it. Don't ask no questions who they are. I'm giving you something that you shouldn't be seeing anyway. You know something? I know, you always getting shots.
Didn't you say you wanted to do this project?
Yeah, don't you ever give it a break? Now I can see why celebrities don't like paparazzi.
You're not gonna tell us anything?
No, these are all targets that's in suspected areas. For some reason, they got a big population of Muslims that come from the various countries over there to come to school here. Moroccans, Somalis, Saudis. And then they all go back from where they come from. I don't have no feelings for them. You're making the Islam look bad. You got to go.
Raza, in that clip we just watched, we saw that Saeed's targets were all Muslim from various ethnic backgrounds. What do you think of the way the FBI targets their victims or their targets, and are they justified in doing so?
Well, see, the thing is, the whole argument about racial profiling comes into the equation. There's a great book called The Muslims Are Coming by Professor Arun Kundnani, and he talks about actually how the same tactics that were used with COINTELPRO and the Black Panthers, by the government, and by J. Edgar Hoover, were essentially copied and just using a cookie cutter approach just put onto the Muslim community. And that actually how they just said, well, if they're Muslims, they're a suspect community, and they were only viewed through the lens of the war on terror. And that's why when he says, because actually he says, that clip goes on saying, isn't it strange all your suspects, your targets are Muslims? He goes, yeah, well, what can I say about that? And he doesn't want to delve more into it, but it's true, the FBI, there have been a disproportionate number of targeting of Muslims, and part of it is and now we see with Trump as well that how the CVE operations, the countering violent extremism operations, are focused solely on Muslims. They're seen as the sole perpetrators of terrorism, and that kind of really clouded the judgment, and does still cloud the judgment of security services who only kind of view Muslims and Islam through that lens.
And Tim, the FBI seems to prey on vulnerable targets in this film. What do you make of Saeed's character?
Yeah, I mean, vulnerable is certainly one word for him. He is rather a tragic figure, really. I mean, he's acting almost entirely out of self-interest and expecting to get more profit from this situation than he actually receives. There are these sort of scenes of him complaining that he's not being given enough, literally enough cash in the envelope that he's receiving. He seems disgruntled and oppressed at all times, but he's also a very kind of cut-off individual. He's a real sort of solo operator and a loner. There are a few scenes with his family, but on the whole he's just going solo on these missions. And he seems very disconnected from the Muslim community, except to the degree in the sense of him actually feigning kind of interest in what they're doing and kind of stepping in there and kind of pretending, talking the talk, if you like, just in order to elicit the kind of supposed kind of information about them that the FBI is hoping for. And not only to elicit it, but to kind of coax out beliefs and comments that can be used against them, which they might otherwise not make. And that really is almost the definition of entrapment.
Would you agree with Tim?
Oh, definitely. And I think with Said, I mean, he is a vulnerable character, but also the bitterness comes out of it's it's that self-interest, because he actually, in the long term, when you start to analyze what he's doing and what he's hoping to gain, you realize there's actually not much to gain at the end of it, because he has to be aloof from the Muslim community because he's spying on Muslims. But secondly, it's his work has meant, when he has been found out in the past, when you see in the documentary, it's meant he doesn't form any real bonds. Like he really is cut off, partly because of his work, and it's just made him a real bitter individual. So when he says, they're giving Muslims a bad name, that for me was an off-the-cuff comment. He doesn't like other Muslims after a while, and that really comes across that he has
quite an ironic comment.
He has an issue with other Muslims, but he
definitely.
also wants that friendship and that community, but he knows he can't get it being in this line of work, but he's chose to be there. You see that you can see why he's such a troubled individual.
We'll take a pause there for now and look at another clip from Terror, where Saeed talks about his tactics on entrapping his target, a white Muslim man named Khalifa.
How exactly do they train you to kind of prepare?
They don't train me for nothing. It's how I use the language. If they train me, I would never get what I want to get because they're strictly textbook. There's a difference between telling somebody and making a suggestion. The entrapment is if I go and tell him, yo, come on, let's go rob a bank, and that was not his intention, that was my intention. So I'm entrapping him. I don't make the suggestions. I may go and say, damn, there's a lot of money in there, boy. I see all the motherfuckers dropping off all that damn money. And he feeds into it, and he go, sure like to take that.
What about your current target? Are your handlers trying to suggest that you...
I don't suggest anything. I wait till as we speak and to get to know each other, what we speak about. So when he brought up camping, that was my key opening right there. The door opened up for me to make a suggestion now. I said, that's cool, man. We can all go camping. I said, why don't we just go a little further? We could train, man, like we do in the military.
From the film, we learned that 9/11 changed the FBI's tactics when it comes to dealing with criminals. So we find out that before 9/11, the FBI would investigate crimes after they've been committed. But then after 9/11, the FBI sought to try and prevent the crimes from happening. Now, Tim, what are the moral implications of this? And can the FBI prevent a crime from happening before it's even been committed? And in a sense, doesn't that make them complicit in that they're paving the way for that crime to occur?
Well, it's certainly a slippery slope. I mean, if a credible bomb threat were to be issued, then of course they're going to investigate that. That's a crime that they're going to want to prevent, and I think prevention is better than cure in that respect. I mean, let's agree that we would rather that bomb did not go off, almost certainly. But if there's no such bomb, and if they're merely waiting to find what kind of person might one day light the fuse to that bomb, long down the road, then you have to ask them at what point they step in, because if they step in prematurely, that is prosecuting individuals really illegally, I think. And I think in the case of the figures that we find in this film, they are so far away from that end game of actually lighting the fuse, if you like, that really they're being almost encouraged further down the road than they would otherwise go. There is a continuum there, and they are some way down that road, I will concede, because some of the beliefs that they hold would be considered quite unpalatable, I think, to non-Muslims. But nonetheless, this is a thought crime if you're going to try and prosecute it.
I mean, in Hollywood films, we're used to seeing the FBI depicted as some kind of sleek and high-tech technology organization. But what do we learn about their methods in this documentary, Raza?
I think what really comes across is just how human they are, and how in this, like, they are kind of wading through the darkness trying to make sense of this all. They've got an objective, which is stop terrorism, but then from there on out it's kind of figure out, lads. And it's just so strange because, you know, when he says in that little clip where he says, oh, you know, they go by the book, you're just an individual. You're not an expert in any way, shape or form apart from you're a member of a community, right? And even then an isolated figure at that. And so what, you're the expert now in this relationship with the FBI? It's so strange in the whole thing. And when you're watching, you realize, oh my God, they don't really seem to know much about what they're doing. I mean, like, you know, they're so used to the kind of crime apparatus that they have is to deal with, you know, to deal with crime once it's happened, to deal with petty theft, criminals in that sense. But terrorism, you can just see that they are incompetent in many ways. And that's what really comes across for me, that they don't actually know what they're doing. And I think also that with the FBI thing, what you get from the documentary is that actually how they have kind of jumped into the deep end, and now they're trying to stay afloat, but they're struggling. Like, you know, for example, before 9/11, they only had a couple of, 1,500 informants, and after 9/11, it goes up to 15,000. Yes. Right? That's ridiculous. I mean, that level to jump to that scale, and they've not managed it, and that really comes across in the documentary.
You really hope that those 15,000 aren't all like Saeed, because it is the phrase that comes to mind is the blind leading the blind, really. Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at our final clip now from the film. Terror, which shows FBI target Khalifa talking about his suspicions of Saeed of being an informant.
Sharif left me alone in his truck. And when he did that, there was a letter sitting on the dashboard from the welfare office. So I picked it up and I snapped a picture of it because I knew he was FBI. Wanted to know who this guy was. And his real name is Saeed S. Torres.
Come on, Sheba. Come on.
This was a guy who used to email me all the time,
Sheba.
call me, you know,
Sheba, stay.
Let's go out for coffee, I'll pick you up. But a lot of that slowed down dramatically after he introduced me to this quote-unquote Muhammad. I put his phone number through Google.
Everyone should be rewarded for the things they do.
That's him.
Either by Allah or by the organization that does these things.
Muhammad, he was an informant for the FBI, and his real name is Shahid Hussein.
So let's now talk about Saeed's target in this film, Khalifa. Tim, how is Khalifa portrayed in this film, and are we made to feel sympathetic to his innocence and him being framed?
Yes, I mean, just to add, the phone number there, the fact that he finds it through one Google and is able to kind of discover that the guy's an informant, I mean, talk about ineptitude, that's kind of the ultimate. But yeah, Khalifa's story in this film is a very valuable additional layer, I think, especially when the filmmakers get access to him personally and start to talk to him. Saeed doesn't know that that's happening. And I think it really enhances the film's perspective quite a lot, and I think it becomes a much stronger film as soon as he is a main figure in it. Because early on, all we have is the kind of layer of his identity that essentially Saeed is working with, his Facebook page and his social media profile. And some of the stuff he's saying is quite provocative. It is quite leading in a way. You can understand why the powers that be might consider him a person of interest, at least. But of course, Saeed then pushes him further down that road, and he becomes very suspicious. And the more we get to know him, actually, the more we discover someone who seems actually a very peaceful individual, with a beef against the US government for sure, with a very sort of particular set of political attitudes, but they are completely within what you would call the not harmful category. And the fact that he is sort of this major figure in this sting, you just wonder, are there not other people they should be looking at really rather more urgently than him? And I think by the end of it, you found him to be a rather sympathetic figure indeed, and someone who's been unfairly blamed for things he hasn't really committed to.
Raza, how do you think how fair it was to target Khalifa by the FBI?
Well, so the thing is, it's what's come out over the last couple of years is how there's a use, they have profiles that they've made and algorithms that are used for this kind of work. And the reality is there's no real profile of a terrorist. They come in all different shapes and sizes. And the problem with using algorithms is that you could take any sort of political comment made by a Muslim and say this leads them to that road, leads them to violence. I mean, and part of the kind of counter-terrorism mindset in this country and in America has been that non-violent extremism leads to violent extremism. And in kind of with that net, you end up catching almost anyone that makes any sort of political comment. And you see, that's how he's been caught really on that basis. I think one line that really stood out for me is when he says, "I knew he was FBI." That bit, I thought I know that kind of, that way, the tone that he used, I've seen that from other Muslims in conversations where what this documentary really shows, right, for me is that it's made Muslims more, they don't trust other Muslims off the back because they feel that there's informants within the community. And you see it all the time. No, that guy might be a spy. I don't really trust him. He might be undercover, etc. So when he says that, it shows that actually his way, that you have to be aware of that kind of problem within your community to be thinking that way. And that's what really came across to me in that scene. And generally, at the end of that, the issue of spying on Muslims, people are aware of it, and they're wary of it, and it makes them, they don't trust their own fellow Muslims. And within the community, you see that breaking apart.
Would you like to jump in there,
Yeah,
Tim?
there's one thing, a question I'm not sure the film really asks, but really you have to consider, in the case of someone like him, if he is put away for a crime like this, when he comes out of jail, what's his attitude going to be? I mean, this is a way to radicalise people more than anything else, I feel.
And last 30 seconds to you, Tim. What do you recommend that people watch this?
Yeah, I do think it's a film worth watching. Very much, I hope that there are further investigations done along these lines, because it's something that does need to be revealed to a wide audience. And I think as filmmaking, it is actually extremely well crafted as well. I think the footage they get from both of these major interviews is extremely strong. And kind of correlates very well with their main argument, and yeah, I was impressed with it.
Well, I'm afraid that's it for this episode of Doc Review. Thank you to both my guests and for you for watching. If you would like to get in touch or even suggest a documentary for us to review, you can let us know on Facebook or on Twitter at Doc Review Show. That's at Doc Review Show. Do let us know your views on today's film. I've been Camelia Shambayati, and see you on the next episode of Doc Review.